Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I'm Jim Cardle. Well, the Select Committee on Economic Development in the House of Representatives here in Austin has just wrapped up its second day of hearings, and Chairman Byron Cook from House District 8, who is also the outgoing chairman of the House State Affairs Committee, has heard from some of our state's largest corporate CEOs, the state demographer, and others who all have an opinion about how to keep Texas the economic powerhouse that it is. How can the 10th largest economy in the globe, that being Texas, and our economy remain strong? We're pleased to be able to visit with Byron Cook, chairman of the House Select Committee on Economic Development today. Well, Byron Cook, chairman of the House Select Committee on Economic Competitiveness, we really appreciate you coming in and joining us today.
Jim, glad to be with you this evening.
You have just wrapped up a couple days of hearings, one in November, one here this month, charged with trying to find out the holy grail of why Texas has been so successful economically and what we can be doing to continue that in the future. After 2 days of hearings, you've heard from some of the nation's biggest company representatives. They happen to be here in Texas, which probably isn't accidental. Tell us what you've heard generally during your testimony.
Well, I think we've heard that, we laid a good historical foundation for business to want to be here. So that's the good news. The reality of the fact is we have a challenge because there are threats to us continuing to have that dominant position. These are all things that we can address, but we're going to need to address them.
And Texas has, as you mentioned, had success or had the fortitude, and it's because we have set up a series, not necessarily of incentives, although that is a word that comes into the lexicon, but Texas has had a series of characteristics that are attractive. Our location, education. Talk about those typical assets a state can have.
Well, first off, we have a big workforce, and that is a huge advantage.
Okay.
Now, a lot of our workforce is now aging out, and so we're going to have a younger generation coming on. One of our challenges that we've discovered through this process is that the younger generation that's coming in is entering the workforce too early and not getting the sufficient education. So we've got to encourage, incentivize these young people to go to community college, to get their four-year degree, to do these things where we'll have a workforce that fits the needs of industry, and particularly the technology industry moving forward.
I believe I saw that you heard from, a lot of people won't know that the state of Texas actually has something that's called a demographer to assist committees like yours forecast the aging and employee population. You mentioned that a lot of folks are aging out. What did the state demographer tell you in terms of the details on
Well, once again, we have your Anglo workforce is aging out.
Okay.
And the rising majority is the Hispanic population. The young Hispanic worker is coming in to take their place. They're smart, they're hardworking, but when they enter the workforce too early, then we're not acquiring the skill sets that some of these, particularly technology companies, require. So that's something that we have got to address.
And I want to thank you again, folks, for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Energy Alliance. We're talking with Chairman Byron Cook, chairman of the House Select Committee on Economic Development. Chairman Cook, let's get into the incentive aspect. Some folks will or won't know there's a part of the code called 313, but even Rick Perry, I've been told, was not initially one that was in favor of the quote-unquote economic incentives. And then he had to deal with landing Toyota. Governor Greg Abbott's doing the same thing, having to look at the Amazon headquarters too. What did you hear in terms of incentive programs being a reality or a fiction in today's competitiveness?
No, they are absolute reality. We heard from some of the brightest business executives this state has to offer. And they will all tell you that if we're going to land these major business opportunities, we have to have those kind of incentives. Because remember, we're competing with all the states in this nation, and most of them have major incentive packages. And if you don't offer that, the businesses are going to go where they get the greatest opportunity. And even if you think about it, just like the whole issue of tax abatement, let me tell you, if you don't do that and you never get the business, you don't even get the part that wasn't abated. But we looked at some of the states, and when we looked at the property tax burden here in Texas versus, say, Florida, even with the abatements, our property taxes are still higher. So when you look at that capital expense over a 20 or 30 year period, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you're unwilling to address these kind of business obstacles, then we'll find ourselves not bringing in these jobs, which, by the way, when these jobs come in, they're high-paying jobs and afford a great quality of life for our young generation. So we have to have these tools.
It's really a reality anymore, isn't it?
It's an absolute reality. Now, if no state offered anything, then that would be a different. But you would still, these businesses are still going to match up cost, because in the end they're kind of agnostic about where the location is. They're looking at where can we get the most productive workers, at the least amount of cost. So these are things we have to deal with.
Okay, moving on to a slightly different angle of that, you have been called by many publications or your peers as the conscience of the house, and there's a lot to that. In particular, the Amazon headquarters too has been in the news, and you're on the record as saying you don't think it's going to be the case that Texas can win that competition. Talk about your thinking there and what some of the processes that a major corporation might be going through.
First off, what these corporations value more than anything else is talent.
Okay.
Talent is what drives the business, and they don't want anything that would chill talent or chill talent wanting to come in. And remember, talent tends to congregate. They tend to congregate. So
You've got Silicon Hills out in the California area, Silicon Valley.
Well, even if you look at it here, look what has happened in Austin over the last 20 years. Look how talent is congregated here. So when you have something that is perceived as negative to diversity, negative to cultural fit, companies tend to not like that. And what I have said in op-eds, when I look at the RFP, when I look at the mission of Amazon, whereas we might get it, become one of the state that has a finalist or two, I think in the end, unless the state withdraws bathroom legislation from its legislative agenda, I don't think we'll be chosen as a final.
Really, so we'd have to learn the lesson the hard way. How about the idea, and clearly that was a focal point during the last legislative session, but is there maybe out for Governor Abbott per se, or you legislators, in terms of addressing the bathroom quote-unquote issue? Is there something that might be an option?
Absolutely. What we know is that we don't have a problem. And matter of fact, even when you talk to law enforcement, they'll tell you there's no problem. We have laws on the books that would that protect our citizens under every circumstance in the bathroom.
Okay.
There's no instance of where we've had issues. So. And business universally does not like this kind of legislation. So I continue to believe that if the governor, who is our most popular elected official, would just make a statement that we're taking this issue off the table, not going to happen on my watch, go on about our business, then we would give business certain. One thing business doesn't like, industry doesn't like, is uncertainty. So as long as this cloud hangs over and they're not certain what Texas is going to do, then it's not likely that Amazon or companies like that will step forward. And by the way, if you looked at North Carolina, when they enacted all this legislation, everything kind of came to a standstill. In fact, Forbes just came out and said that during the course of that legislation, it cost the state of North Carolina $500 million. $500 million. Now, North Carolina rescinded most of it, and then the rest of it, they had a settlement with the ACLU. And the point is,
they beat Texas the other day in the ranking, correct?
Yes. So they went from stalled to they picked back up to the top location, and that's because they removed what's considered as punitive, discriminatory, non-productive legislation. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I'll tell you, I thought it was interesting. I think one of the drivers in that was, and I'm a big sports fan, Mike Krzyzewski, coach of Duke. Last year, when it got tournament time, he's one of the top-rated teams. But when it got to the grade 8 game, he's playing South Carolina now because they had that legislation in place. He was seated higher, and Duke should have been had the home court. They had to go to South Carolina and play, and guess who ends up in the Final Four?
North Carolina.
South Carolina. And then afterwards, he actually publicly said that he blamed part of the loss on losing his home court advantage and that was a result of that legislation. Which, by the way, that fired him up because they're pretty serious about basketball in North Carolina.
I was going to say, and we all love a sports analogy here in Texas. One final question. I want to be respectful of your time, talking about the bathroom bill, and that leads to some of these purity tests that we're seeing have such a prevalent role in politics, particularly here in Texas these days. And the old question keeps coming up: could Ronald Reagan be elected in today's environment? He said, first of all, you don't criticize your fellow party peers, and yet he did some things that are not remembered frequently, like the immigration bill. He did raise taxes a couple times. Give us your thumbnail sketch here, a final question of what you think the idea of Ronald Reagan's era versus what we're facing today.
Well, I think it would be challenging for him to be elected in today's time frame. But think back. In the end, we need to use good common sense, and we need to do what's right for this state. And what I'm hopeful that our party moves back towards both of those things, because when we move towards those tenets and away from these really divisive positions that don't advance this state, we're going to be a whole lot better off. And I believe that time will come because I think the public expects more out of us.
Well, speaking of what's expected out of us, that is to keep these discussions short. But Byron Cook, Chairman of the Select Committee on Economic Development, we appreciate you joining us
today.
You
bet. I'm glad to be here, Jim.
I should also mention that after being elected in 2002, you're retiring from House District 8. Congratulations on a tremendous career.
Well, you think about it. When I get through, it'll be 16 years. So that's long enough. And I'm kind of excited about looking to see what's on the horizon. There'll be other platforms and ways to continue to hopefully be a good steward for the state.
Nothing wrong with going out on top. Appreciate you joining us. Folks, we appreciate you joining us to visit with Byron Cook today from House District 8. Remember, you're either an insider or you're not. I'm Jim Cardle. Thanks for joining us.